Welcome to the Beyond Ordinary Women podcast. Every 2 weeks, we post podcast versions of one of our free training videos, or you can access our videos now at beyondordinarywomen.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, I'm Daigle, and I'd like to welcome you to the second in our series of videos, Meetings That Work. In our first video, I spoke with Claudia McGuire, who's here with me again, about the beforehand of meetings to make meetings work better, all the planning, the things that need to be done in advance. And now we're going to talk about during the meeting, which is probably the part that people think of the most when they think of meetings. But you know, Claudia, recently I was at a meeting with a sweet young gal who is a great leader. She has so much potential, and I think it's the first meeting that she ever ran. And so I so identify with her because we all start somewhere. And part of the time she did a great job, but what she didn't do was really move us along. We would get sidetracked. We would get maybe a little too involved in a particular topic and go on when maybe it wasn't productive any longer. And just, I don't think she knew what to do.
Right.
And one of the other participants started kind of moving us on herself. She would go, let's move on to this next thing. I want to talk about it. And so I know I identify with that. It's a hard thing to do sometimes, is to move the meeting. So what have you learned about moving the meeting, about making sure that the meeting is productive?
Well, that can be very awkward when you're in that kind of a meeting. You're like, do I say something? Do I not? Especially if you're a leader, because you kind of want to take over. It just starts bubbling up, and you just try to sit on it and not take over running the meeting.
Yeah, I thought about doing that,
yeah.
but I didn't.
Well,
yeah.
it happens, and you have to just figure out, should I do this or should I not do this? I will say I've been in a meeting before, and this was shortly after I went on staff at the church. And I thought it was fairly poorly run. I also felt that things were just brought up on the fly. There was no agenda. We kind of had a purpose. We had been told, hey, we're going to have a meeting. It's about this. But when I got there, there was this expectation for us to be a lot farther down the road than we were. I was just hearing this for the first time. And I thought, what is going on here? I felt totally unprepared for that meeting. And so, again, after that meeting, I sent an email and went, it would really help if we had an agenda, or I would have known that this is what we're going to be talking about, because I like to process things and look or research or whatever before I get into that kind of situation. I'm not real good just like immediately with ideas. And I actually sent that email to the executive pastor of our church, which probably was a little forward on my part. And I'm sure he's done 5,000 meetings, but I was so frustrated in that meeting because I just felt it was not fair. And it really didn't set the participants up for success in that meeting. So, going back to what you just asked as far as keeping it on track and knowing what to say and how to move it along, I think you do have to be just very cognizant of the flow of the meeting. If you're facilitating the meeting, it is your job to keep it on track. That doesn't mean that you're, so focused on your agenda that you don't allow for enough interactivity to happen or discussion, and you don't talk the whole time so you're actually shutting people down. You want that interaction. You've invited these people to come. They're part of your team. You want to hear from them, and you value their opinions or their ideas or their concerns. So moving along in your agenda is a good idea, but allowing a little bit of a few detours now and then is good, but you also need to know when to reel it back in. And some people are very intimidated about doing that, and so therefore you usually end up with really long meetings that you don't feel like there was no real decisions made. You kind of come out feeling a little more confused than you went in. What just happened there kind of feeling. So that's just a good way to remember to keep on track, is allow interactivity, allow people to talk, give their input, but know when to say, okay, I think we've got some great ideas here. Let's move along to the next topic. You are in charge of the meeting. It's your responsibility to keep it going and to keep the flow going. So,
do you think that gets easier with practice?
I think it does. Again, I think some people are just intimidated and they don't know how to help a person stop talking, because it's easy for one person sometimes to dominate a meeting and it becomes all about her or him or their situation. And you have to have enough finesse to go, I think we understand where you're coming from and we're making a note of that. Let's move on so we can accomplish things like we want to here in the time that we have allotted. And I think other people appreciate that when you're able to move on to the next topic.
And that's a great way to do it. And I've certainly used that tactic myself on many occasions.
Yeah.
So as you think about during the meeting, other than that, there will be times when, particularly if you're there to make a decision, that everyone will not agree. What would you say to someone trying to lead a meeting who may be a little bit afraid of people not agreeing? Because that can be difficult and challenging sometimes.
It can. Again, I think it's important when you set up your meeting from the outset of it, just to remind people why you're there. This is our purpose today, and this is the primary thing we're discussing. We're going to have some other issues that we're going to talk about, but I really want to stay on task. And you know what? No judgment. Any ideas accepted or any concern, whatever issue, let's bring it up. We might not end up talking about it here today, but if it's on your heart or it's bothering you, we need to talk about it. On the other hand, there'll be no attacking, because I don't know about you, but I have been in meetings before where either someone was kind of attacked for something they did or did not do publicly. And I've even been on that receiving end of me being in a meeting reporting about a weekend activity that I was in charge of. And when I talked about some issues that came up, this person looked at me and said, "I don't believe you." And I was like, well, I've never heard that person say that to anybody else in a meeting ever on the 15 years I've been here. And I said, I don't lie. And I just had to kind of call that out. And I felt like that meeting facilitator should have stepped in and said, wait a minute, why don't you believe her? Instead, it was like dead silence. So don't allow your team members or your participants to attack one another in any way. If there's an issue that comes up that people are like nodding, like, yeah, that's a real problem, then talk about it for a while. See if you can come up with some solutions. If an issue comes up that really isn't related to your purpose or the outcomes that you're looking for as a result of that meeting, do the parking lot. I don't know if you know about the parking lot in a meeting. Have somebody ahead of time be in charge of the parking lot. And that can be a piece of paper, a whiteboard, a flip chart. And when an issue comes up that's kind of derailing it or causes a disagreement, record it, write it down on the parking lot and say, okay, we hear what you're saying. I think it's valuable that we talk about that at some future date. So we're going to make a note of it and we'll come back to it. But right now, let's just get back on the agenda at hand. And so that shows value to that person. Okay, they heard me. We are going to talk about it, but it doesn't totally derail your meeting. I think that's really important. And then make sure you come back and talk about it, right?
Right, and as the leader, you have to be sure that happens.
Exactly, that's your responsibility.
Yeah, because just writing it down doesn't value it enough unless you actually come back to the parking lot.
And
yes.
If you have somebody in a meeting that kind of personally attacks you, like I remember last time we met and I wasn't invited and I heard about these things and I didn't know, I wasn't part of that, whatever it is, if it's an attack against you as the leader or the meeting planner, just talk about it. Just communicate it right there, because everybody's going to feel that awkwardness and that uneasiness. And just say, you know what, I'm so sorry that I made you feel that way. Could we talk about this for a few minutes after the meeting? I would really like to hear what happened or what you perceived happened or how that hurt your feelings. Could we just talk after the meeting for a few minutes? And then do. But don't let it become about you and her, you and him in a situation. Again, derails the meeting. That's what people will remember instead of your agenda, the purpose that you're there. So again, just talk about it. Communication is huge, and people like to be included in the loop and in decisions, and even in disagreements. They want to be heard.
Right. So do you have any tips for ending the meeting on time?
Ending it on time. That can be difficult, but I think it's great just to be able to kind of start into a little review. You know, as you've wrapped up kind of the last topic, to be able to say, is there anything else that we haven't discussed here? Is there anything that, you've thought about in the past few minutes or you've been uncomfortable talking about, let's bring that up. And then kind of review where you were. This is what we talked about today. Is everybody clear on this? Your job responsibility, the report I need next week, whatever those things are. And then just end the meeting. End it on time. And I'm a big prayer. I say if you're going to include prayer in your meetings, it's good to do it at the end. A lot of times at the beginning, if you ask people, does anybody have any things going on in their life or prayer requests? Prayer requests are awesome, and we need to be praying for one another. But sometimes if you do that at the beginning, that's all people think about. Mm-hmm. Or somebody cries, it's a horrible situation, and again, your meeting's derailed. So wait until the end if you want to end in prayer, and just pray for your people and check in with them and say, how is life going for you? And before we leave today, let's just pray for one another. But I would save that for the end of the meeting so it doesn't become your focus. Unless, of course, it's a prayer meeting. And then, of course, you want to pray. Right. You want to do that.
Right. And so if you leave it till the end, you need to end the business part a little bit earlier in order to save that time.
Right.
And
5-10 minutes.
10 minutes, and basically say we have 10 minutes left to pray, and that gives them the sense that they're not supposed to go on and on, that it will be a fairly short prayer meeting.
Exactly. And again, if there's someone that really is facing a difficult issue, meet with them afterwards and just pray with them one-on-one, or let them talk for a few minutes. But not everybody needs to hear everything, and so, just be sensitive to that.
And are there times that you really have to just table some things until the next meeting? If you've begun with the most important part of the meeting, are there times when you just say, these other things were great to discuss? How else could you deal with it besides just saying, we'll talk about it at another meeting? Are there other ways to deal with less important issues?
Or just not mentioning it. Again, communicate. You can say, you'll notice on your agenda there are 2 items here we didn't get a chance to talk about. Or to say, I felt that we covered what we really needed to today. Maybe these were kind of non-essentials, but I'm going to follow up with an email, and I want your input on these 2 things, or I'll comment or catch you up on these 2 things that we didn't have a chance. And it's okay to say that, but again, communicate it, so when somebody leaves the meeting, they're not like, how come she didn't talk about that? That's the thing I wanted to hear. That's the thing I wanted to comment on. Right. So make sure you address it and just say, we will follow up with this. Again, also with your parking lot issues, if those are relevant to another meeting, include those also.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Claudia. You've given some great tips, and as someone who has also led a lot of meetings, I know I don't always do those things perfectly, but it does help the more you do it. Right. The more comfortable you are, and the more you're aware of those aspects of the meeting as you're leading it. So I
think it's better.
Yeah, it really does. It does get better. So we would really like to encourage you, as a new leader or one who's really never thought through how to do a meeting well, to contact us if you need to. We'd love to answer specific questions. We'd love to pray for you as you attempt to incorporate some of the skills that Claudia's been talking about. And I hope that you'll join us for part 3, because the after is as important as the before and the during.
Yes.
And so we'd like to invite you to join us on that.
Thanks for listening to the Beyond Ordinary Women podcast. You can find more podcasts and information about women in leadership by going to beyondordinarywomen.org. This podcast was produced by Beyond Ordinary Women Ministries. Our production team includes Evelyn Babcock, Kay Daigle, Kay Halligan, Deborah Herring, Sharifa Stevens, and John Sparks. Theme music, Back in Stride by Don Miller, used by courtesy of Christine Miller.